August heat can slow your compost down. That sounds backward until you lift the lid on a pile you have been feeding all summer and find a cool, dry center where you expected steam. I used to assume a hot week was doing half the work for me. Then I learned how quickly a backyard pile can lose the conditions the microbes need, even while the air outside feels brutal. 5 different things can stall a working pile in August, and each one leaves a different clue. One of those fixes has a nasty twist. Do too much of the obvious thing, and the pile can come back smelling worse than it did before. Number 1. Too dry. The same heat that cooks it also drains it. You've been checking the pile every few days, half expecting the August heat to do the composting for you. Instead, it just sits there, gray and crumbly, like straw that forgot what it used to be. Here's the part nobody mentions when they tell you heat speeds things up. It does. And that's exactly what's working against you. Hot weather is ideal for the microbes running your pile. The same sun also strips water off the surface faster than any other stretch of the year. Both things are happening at once, and if you're not stepping in, the drying wins every time. I was reading a K-State extension piece on summer composting one evening, and a line stopped me cold. It said the heat itself was never the villain in this. The moisture it dragged out right along with it was. I had spent 2 straight Augusts watching my own pile go quiet and chalking it up to bad luck, when really I just wasn't putting water back in fast enough to keep pace with what the sun was taking. So don't write the pile off yet. Microbes need steady moisture the way you need your morning coffee. Cut it off, and they don't die outright. They just slow to a crawl and sit there waiting, doing nothing, while your kitchen scraps keep piling up on top like nothing's changed. Grab a handful from the center of the pile. Squeeze it hard in your fist. A few drops running out between your fingers means you're in good shape. Nothing at all means the core has gone dry and those microbes are basically dormant. Check this 2 or 3 times a week once a heat stretch hits, not once a month like you might in spring. Don't just tip a bucket over the top and call it handled. That water runs off the outside edges and never reaches the middle, where it actually matters most. Pull the pile apart in sections. Wet each layer as you go, then stack the whole thing back together. Wet the core, not the crust. If your bin sits in full shade all day, you can stretch that check-in out a little. Direct sun pulls moisture out of a pile far faster than shade ever will, so a shaded pile buys you a bit more time between waterings. The heat isn't lazy, it's thirsty. Feed it water, not just hope. Number 2, too small. Full to your eyes, cold to the microbes. Your pile might look full to you. To the microbes doing the actual work, it might still be too small to ever get hot. If your bin is a small plastic tumbler or a thin wire ring, you can wrap both arms around. That might be the actual problem here, not the heat at all. Heat only builds up in a pile if there's enough mass holding it in. A small pile has too much outside surface pressed against the open air for how little material it's got, so whatever warmth the microbes generate just leaks straight back out before it can stack up and hold. A bigger pile does the opposite. The outer few inches act like insulation, wrapping the whole core in its own blanket and trapping the heat right where the work is actually happening. Picture a campfire built from 3 sticks. It'll catch. It'll smoke and glow for a while. It'll never throw real heat, no matter how long you sit there feeding it 1 twig at a time. Not even close. Load on enough wood at once instead, and the fire holds its own temperature without you doing anything else to it. The number that matters here is 3. A cube, roughly 3 feet on every side, close to 27 cubic feet total, is the rough floor for a pile that can actually cook itself. Anything smaller than that will still break down eventually, given enough time. It just never climbs hot enough to move fast. No matter how well you manage the water or get the mix right, under that number, the fix is simple. Combine what you've got. An old gardener down the road from me, guy's been at this on the same lot for decades, has a rule he won't budge on. He calls anything much smaller than that a cold pile. It may still break down, but it will never hold hot compost heat on its own. He measures with his own 2 arms. If he can wrap them clean around the outside of a pile, he adds more material before he touches anything else that day. If you're using an insulated tumbler, don't apply the 3-foot rule literally. Its shell changes how quickly the contents lose heat. This is really about open bins and heaps sitting out in the yard. Here's the fix, and it costs you nothing extra. If you've got 2 smaller piles going right now, say one of kitchen scraps and one of dry leaves sitting off to the side, stop keeping them apart. Combine them into a single pile today. Combining 2 undersized piles gives the center more mass to hold the heat the microbes are already making. Give it a week after you combine them before you judge anything. The middle needs time to build back up before you'll feel a real difference with your hand. Size isn't a detail here, it's the whole engine. Number 3. Too little nitrogen. Fed every week, still starving. You've been feeding it every week. The pile just isn't hungry for what you're giving it. By late summer, a lot of gardeners have already burned through last fall's stash of dry leaves. What's left in the bin is mostly stems, dead flower heads, and prunings pulled off overgrown shrubs. All of that is brown. None of it is green, and green is the ingredient the pile actually needs right now. You keep tossing in the same dry material week after week, wondering why nothing changes. Carbon is food for the microbes doing the work in there. Nitrogen is what lets them multiply fast enough to eat through it. A pile stacked with nothing but brown material is like a kitchen stocked with every ingredient you could want and exactly 1 cook working the stove. Everything still gets made, it just takes forever. I ran a pile heavy on brown for most of one July, watched it sit there, technically working, going nowhere fast. Once you see the ratio, the rest of the pile makes sense. Aim for roughly 3 parts brown to 1 part green by volume, measured in buckets or shovelfuls, not exact scoops. Fresh grass clippings or kitchen vegetable scraps count as green. Mix that green layer into the middle of the pile, not scattered thin across the top where it dries out before it does anything. Bury it. If your pile already runs heavy on grass clippings or kitchen scraps, this isn't your fix. That's usually the opposite problem, too much nitrogen, and it shows up as a smell instead of a cold pile. You've been feeding it, just not what it's hungry for. The next one is the fix that trips up gardeners who did everything right up to this point. The next mistake starts with the same bucket of water that fixed entry 1, which is why it is so easy to miss. Number 4. Too wet. The cure for dry that backfires. If you already did what this list told you to do 2 entries ago and added water, there's a real chance you just traded one problem for a worse one. A week of dumping water on the pile every evening because the heat had you spooked usually ends the same way. Then, one afternoon, you lift the lid expecting the payoff, and instead you get slapped with a smell like spoiled eggs. You didn't underwater, you overcorrected, dumping water in out of fear the pile was drying out, until the whole thing turned dense and waterlogged with no air left in it anywhere. Rotten egg smell, or something close to ammonia, the second you lift the lid. Material that clumps into dark, sticky chunks instead of crumbling apart in your hand. Squeeze a fistful from the middle. Same test as a few fixes back, and this time water runs out instead of just a few drops. A dry pile and a waterlogged pile can look the same from the lid. Squeeze the center before you add anything. Water fills the same gaps in the pile that air needs to move through. Flood those gaps and the microbes that need oxygen shut down completely. A different set takes over, the kind that doesn't need air at all, and they work far slower while leaving behind that rotten egg smell as a byproduct of doing their job. Your nose is basically a warning light for oxygen levels in there, so the fix isn't more water and it isn't waiting either. Turn the whole pile over, all of it, not just the top layer. Mix in dry brown material, shredded leaves, torn cardboard, sawdust, whatever's sitting around. Enough to soak up the excess and pry the gaps back open. Don't tuck a tarp over it right after you finish. Let it breathe for a few days first, uncovered, before you decide whether it needs another pass. I read the same advice you probably did. Piles dry, just add water. So I watered mine 4 days straight during a heat wave, feeling proud of myself for staying on top of it. Lifted the lid on day 5 and the smell hit me before I even saw the mess. Not what the advice promised. The middle had gone black and sticky, one solid clump instead of loose material I could crumble in my hand. I'd done exactly what I was told to do, and I'd still gotten it wrong. This doesn't apply if you're somewhere that gets steady natural rainfall through the summer. That kind of wet usually comes from a pile sealed up tight, with nowhere for water to drain, not from anyone actively watering it themselves. You didn't escape the problem, you just got a wetter version of it. If that trick just saved a whole summer's worth of kitchen scraps from turning into a smelly, useless mess, subscribe and hit the bell. There's a new one every week, and none of them cost you anything to watch. Number 5. Not turning. A cold center just needs a fresh meal. Even with the water right and the greens right, a pile that never gets stirred will still find a way to suffocate itself. 2 weeks without a turn is my personal limit. Push past that, and the center goes cold before you'd ever notice. No smell, no obvious sign, just quiet. A pile settles under its own weight. Layer sits on layer, and eventually the material near the core gets pressed together so tight there's barely any room left for air to move through it. This happens even when your moisture is dialed in and your green to brown ratio is exactly right. Nothing you did wrong, just weight doing what weight does. Here's the part that trips people up. A pile that goes cold in the middle after being warm the week before feels like a failure. It isn't. The heat you were feeling was microbes eating through the easy material right there, working fast enough to warm the whole core. Once they've cleared it out, that spot has nothing left to chew on, so it cools. The meal just ran out in that one section, not the whole operation. Turning is how you deliver a fresh meal. Pull the outer cooler material into the center and push the used-up core material out toward the edges, where it gets first crack at whatever you add next. It moves fresh material to where the hungry microbes are waiting. Watch for the cooling itself as your cue, roughly once every 1 to 2 weeks in summer heat. If your pile runs hotter and more active than most backyard setups, it may ask for a turn sooner than that. When the center cools, turn it. If it's been longer than 2 weeks since you last stuck a fork in that pile, that's probably entry number 5 right there. This doesn't apply if your pile is brand new or barely a few weeks old. Turning too early can interrupt that first heat cycle before it ever really gets going, so give it one full hot stretch before you start stirring things up. Grab a pitchfork or a shovel, whatever's leaning against the fence. You don't need anything fancier than that. And you don't need to do the whole pile in one motion. A few good passes, moving outside to middle and back, gets the job done. Turn it, and the pile catches its breath again. August heat exposes weak spots in a working pile fast. The center tells you what failed, and once you read that clue, the fix is usually simple. If you're short on greens and don't want to wait for grass clippings, used coffee grounds work as a nitrogen boost. They're classified as a green even though they're brown, roughly a 20-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Keep them under about 1/5 of the pile's total volume and mix them in. Don't just dump them on top. This afternoon, before it gets dark, grab a handful from the middle of the pile and give it a squeeze. If it crumbles dry instead of holding together, water it right then, layer by layer, and throw a tarp over it before the sun comes back tomorrow. Check the center before the next hot day. Catch the clue early and the pile keeps moving.